Are there any weeds growing around your compost pile? That's the easiest telltale sign. If you have a compost pile and there's not a plethora of weeds that are growing around it, or they do sprout successfully but pretty quickly afterwards they die off, that's a telltale sign that... Hey guys, this is your boy Big Wheel Dog 82 in the soil. And just like I was saying in the opener there, when it comes to your compost, if you're not doing some important steps along the way, when it comes time that you think that you're ready to use that compost, it could be the one thing holding your garden back in the best case, and in the worst case, it can really do damage to your plants. So this is how I go about making sure that my compost is good and safe, so that when I put it in, I don't got anything to worry about. All right, so the first thing that I do, and I've said this many times, is any of the inputs that I get, I go ahead and bioassay right away. And what that is taking some plants, put it in what you picked up, and seeing if it has an effect. I've already done a series of videos on bioassaying, so please, I will put it in the description down below. But it's a very important step, because that can save you a whole lot of headache later on down the road. But there are ways of telling whether or not your compost is good, even if you failed to do the bioassay before you got started. What I do is, when I pick up my manure, and it's a combination of horse, cow, and chicken manure, and the problems are possibly in the horse and the cow manure. If there's anything that has stuff like grazon in it, that stuff will not break down. But luckily enough for you, if you've made a compost pile and have not gone ahead and done a bioassay, I'm gonna show you one really solid way of telling whether or not it's affected. This might not look all that pretty right now, but what this is telling me here is a very important thing. If you have a compost pile and it's sat here and it's done and finished and you're just waiting to put it on, if you do not see what you're seeing here, which is weeds everywhere of all kinds, broadleaf, we got grass here, we've got like new weeds starting there, you've got stuff over here. If you're not seeing this, you got a problem. Let me explain. So what those weeds around that compost pile is telling you, it's telling you a lot. It's saying that there is not likely to have much herbicide in it. Now, why do I say that? Well, because a lot of the stuff that contains the herbicide is stuff that breaks down relatively quick, like grass or manure. And as you add water to the pile to get that compost going, all of that stuff is draining into the soil. Now, that's a downhill slope, so the backside where the fence is, you can guarantee that even when it's not being soaked into the soil, it's flowing down past that stuff. So that tells me I see weeds. There should be less risk of having grazon. Is it a foolproof plan? No. But it's part of my way of ensuring that I'm not hurting my garden or my pots by putting it in it. So bioassay was the first thing before stuff gets started. If you don't do that, you should be bioassaying your finished compost. If you fail to do that, it's the weeds around the compost pile. Here's another way. So what I did is I took my finished compost and then I fed it to my worm bin. Now, why would you want to do that? I mean, it's compost, it's ready to go out into the yard, right? Yes, but I've heard it somewhere, and I cannot remember exactly where I heard it from, but it goes a little something like, anything a worm touches makes it better. That includes especially compost. So let me show you what I did. You would assume that I went ahead and fed them. Oops, this one's starting to fall down. Let's fix her real quick. There we go. You would assume that I fed them with some type of liquid fertilizer or something like that. Nope, I didn't. All I did was, and it went kind of crazy, but I used 50% worm castings along with ProMix in every single one of these as when they were a small, tiny plant. And I have not fed them a single time yet. Why did I do that? To prove a point. I thought that my compost was relatively decent, but if I can get that kind of growth on them, and I've started these plants, let's see if you can see that Sun Gold was March the 20th of this year, and I did it in this clear so I could see the root growth too. But yeah, they were 2.5 weeks old when I put them in all these containers, every single one of these plants. And they are lush, they are green, they are trying to fruit, they were trying to flower. These are marigolds here. But all of these have the same thing in common, is I haven't had to touch them other than watering since I put them in here. And it was thanks to the worm castings that came from my compost. Now, I'm not expecting everybody to go out and do this, because believe it or not, it's probably kind of wasteful, especially of the worm castings. They don't make them fast and they don't give a lot. So going 50% on it, I almost cleaned myself out of worm castings. But I learned a very valuable point. That point is, if you have enough nutrients in what you're putting into the potting mix, and it's not something that's granular that needs to be broken down, it's already partially broken down because you use the microbes and any bugs or whatever in the whole breaking down process, you don't really need much. These plants, when they're small, don't need a whole lot of nutrients. But if you could go ahead and give them everything they need from the start, you're pretty much maintenance free other than water. Here's another prime example. This is my wicking beds, and as you can see, they've been topped off with compost. That one's waiting. This has been topped off, and these are my onions, and you see how big they are. Now, I did give these guys a little bit of granular fertilizer at planting, but after that, I added all of this compost on top. And then, to even make it better, I added some of my worm castings to it as well. And other than doing that, I haven't had to touch these because the water stays contained. So these are just growing on their own in a moisture-rich, system off of what was just compost. And it's because I made sure that this was not going to be a worry. Oops. See, and that's the other thing about compost. Even when you get it right, you're still going to have weeds from time to time. But a lot of these look like grass seed that might have blown in when I was doing my mowing. So, but yeah, that's another step. Oh, and you wanted the side benefit too? This has a little bit of water runoff here. So this is what, right down here is where this wicking bed, when it gets overflown with water, it drains out. Well, what happens when it goes through this nutrient-rich bed and it drains out? Those nutrients are going to come down there too. Well, guess what also happened? Yes, we've got weeds. There's mint there that I can't get rid of, dandelions, but it drains over here and this huge comfrey plant gets fed automatically through that wicking bed. Again, something that's hands-free that I don't have to do because I set it up and it's got the right ingredients. Okay, now I'm going to show you my very last use of my compost / or worm castings. And in this one, I did a combination. I took some of my stored compost and some of my worm castings. I put them into a a pouch that I made out of landscape fabric, weed barrier, and then I made a quick extract out of it. That's all you do. I put a zip tie on it, put it in water, dunked it for a little bit, let it set for about 5 minutes, massaged it, and then strained it. And guess what I was using that for? Let me show you. Compost extract goes in these puppies. And do you see what happens when you extract out the water-soluble nutrients out of your compost? You can spread not only the biology, but the nutrients over a larger area. Everything that I fed them is nice and lush and is trying to do its best growing. Those are dead plants, so, but you see that one right here? It's starting to come back already. But yeah, all of my potted plants get it. And I do have liquid fertilizer. I recommend AgroThrive just because it's pretty much the best for me in my application of it. I am also an affiliate, so I've got a link down in the description area. So if you guys want to grab some, you can, but I haven't needed it yet. So if I keep a decent amount of it, which is why I built my brand new bed, then I won't need very much of anything else other than my compost and my worm castings. So, but yeah, all of this is the compost. I'm telling you, this, all you're seeing here is reused soil from last year. And the only amending I really did to it was my compost, and maybe I added some sulfur just to make sure that the acidity was right. But yeah, that's it. And then planting hole, they get a little bit of granular, but a little bit of granular is not going to do all of this to plants. When I say you need to bioassay any manures that you pick up, I say that as a warning because if you fail to do so, your compost is likely to hurt your plants, and that's the last thing you want. I always bioassay. I use beans and I use tomato plants. Those are the two best plants to show you early on whether or not there's a problem. And if you really don't want to mess with the raw manure when you get it to do the bioassay, you can go ahead and compost it. But before you go ahead and throw it on your bed, there's two things that you need to look for. The first thing, are there any weeds growing around your compost pile? That's the easiest telltale sign. If you have a compost pile and there's not a plethora of weeds that are growing around it, that tells you there's something wrong. Because all those nutrients that are in that compost that get leached out over the composting process, that goes directly into the ground. And if there's any kind of herbicides in that compost, there will be no weeds around your compost bin. So that's the first telltale sign if you fail to do a bioassay. The second sign that you've got a problem is if you go ahead and test your finished compost and use the beans and tomato plants, like I mentioned, if they grow and they're misshapen, or they fail to sprout, or they do sprout successfully, but pretty quickly afterwards they die off, that's a telltale sign that there's a problem with that compost. And if that happens, your best bet is, unfortunately, throw it away. So please keep a lookout. Be careful what you add into your garden, because once it's there, you've got a bigger problem on your hands. So with that, I'm your boy, Big Wheel Dog 82, in the soil. And I'm out here, guys. I'll see you later.